Sure. I mean, I think what's fascinating about both the Bilbao and the Detroit examples is that these are cities and regions that have dealt with really some tremendous shocks to the system, certainly over generations. But in Bilbao's example, we have a situation where political instability had fueled sort of extremism, had fueled a lot of instability, which led to a group of leaders coming together and saying, we must move forward, and sort of creating that momentum to be able to almost reinvent itself, and having that leadership within to reinvent the city. And today you see a generational shift in Bilbao, where they are actually creating the next generation of leaders that are taking the Basque country in an integrated way with the rest of Spain and the rest of Europe. That's something that we had not seen in generations past, and that's a marked shift. In Detroit, the exogenous factor there was bankruptcy. And that is, there's nothing quite like bankruptcy to wake up a city and say, we must do something different. We must no longer rely on a single industry, or we must look at ways to create partnerships where we can overcome the current, not just the financial crisis, but sort of the internal sort of crisis of innovation and leadership that I think had been has still been festering in Detroit for a generation. So I think coming to terms with it is a big part of leadership, and recognizing that there is something that's happened that actually requires a different approach, or a new approach, or an innovative approach is a big part of leadership. Of course, once you've decided that we need to innovate and change or do something different, then you of course have to have the right partners around the table, and you have to make sure that you are actually engaging the right sectors, you have the right people at the table. Now, your approach could be a very public approach. It can be a very public civic approach, or a public-private approach. And I think how leaders are open to which of those algorithms to bring together is extremely important. In the Bilbao example, you had a very public approach, where you were going to have leaders relying on civic leaders, you're going to have people relying on community leaders, on community activists to come together and really build the next generation and the future. In Detroit, it was very much stabilizing the financial situation and bringing together foundations and corporations, of course with governments and with bond issuances and so forth. So I think who you bring around the table very much speaks to what kind of leadership you are looking for the next generation. In certain places, those mechanisms don't exist. So it is not always easy to bring non-government players to the table. And I think investing in those tables ahead of time is really about building resilient cities. So the more you build those relationships, the more you build relationships and connections to foundations, for example, or to non-government organizations or to civil society in the downtime. So when not in a crisis mode, but in between crises, that determines who comes around the table when there is a crisis. I think leadership is really a lot about taking risks, and what we found is leadership can be thrust upon you in a moment of crisis, or in a moment of despair, or in a moment of needing to do something differently, or it can be a moment of actually thinking about the future and trying to come up with a solution before it is thrust upon you. And I think what we've seen in these examples is that unfortunately most of the time people react only when forced to react, but acting in advance of a crisis is most important.